The Baltimore Ravens 2021 season could go down as one of those what could have beens, what should have beens, but ultimately wasn't. Because you're talking about a team that had been in the playoffs the past couple of years, team that you're saying, okay, defense solid, franchise quarterback. These are the types of teams that scare you, and especially when you look at the early season returns on this Ravens team. They were sitting at 5-2. They were even 8-3 heading into December. They had beaten the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, you look at them and you say, okay, this team might be able to do something. This team might be a contender. But the one thing I looked at with them was the fact that when you looked at that remaining 6 games on the schedule, it got tough in a pretty big hurry. And then, of course, you had some of the injury problems with Lamar Jackson and the fact that he was going to be out, while backup quarterback Tyler Huntley certainly came in and played well for somebody that was an undrafted guy that you're hoping to just get anything out of. Actually gave you a little bit of life at times. But ultimately, for this Ravens team, you're talking about being 5-2 at the bye. You feel pretty good about your playoff chances. When you're 8-3 heading into December, you feel pretty outstanding about your playoff chances. And to lose your last 6 games and miss the playoffs, that's a pretty epic choke job. I don't care who was out of the lineup. I don't care what the fuck happens. Like, the mere fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers, whose defense was kind of doo-doo this year, and Big Ben was absolute ass cheeks, was able to make the playoffs over you, that's a shame. You should be ashamed of yourself. Like I said, it's easy to blame Lamar Jackson, his injury, the offensive downturn in general, Lamar's less than stellar 2021 play specifically, because he was a bit down from 2019 or 2020 levels, especially the interceptions compared to touchdowns. Like, that certainly wasn't great. But the defense crapped the bed too, and other areas of the offense crapped the bed as well. It's also a fact that they played 5 playoff teams, ultimately playoff teams, in their last 6 games. So 5 of their last 6 games were against playoff opponents. Like, that end stretch for the Ravens was always going to be brutally tough, so they needed to get every win they possibly could early on. Because you didn't want to have to count on those last 6 games to get you into the playoffs. And even with that, they had to count on those last 6 games to get into the playoffs, and they lost them all. So while you could sit there and blame Lamar Jackson's injuries and some of Lamar Jackson's gameplay, let's also be clear here. It is a problem when your starting quarterback, who missed 5 games, by the way, is your team's leading rusher. That's a problem. It's a problem when your offensive line gives up almost 60 sacks on the season. Like, their pass blocking was absolutely atrocious, and you saw that at different points in time during the year. That Thursday game against Miami, perfect example. They had no business losing to the fucking Dolphins, and they did. Because they couldn't protect Lamar Jackson. This is not me just trying to make excuses for Lamar. There were periods of time he just fucking needed to play better. But there were also periods of time where the supporting cast around him needed to play better. And the fact that he was your leading rusher, missing 5 games, and he's the damn quarterback, that means there's something structurally, fundamentally wrong with this buildup of the offense for the Baltimore Ravens. Mark Andrews is an elite tight end. Like, that was nice to see him have a big year. Hollywood Brown had an okay, solid year. He went over 1,000 yards receiving, but you're probably hoping for a little bit more out of Rashad Bateman, but we'll see what happens next year. But that offensive line was fucking atrocious. And their defense, they were best in the league against the run, but they were the worst in the league against the pass. They were barely inside the top 20 in terms of points allowed, and they were 23rd in sacks. So they were getting shredded through the air, in part because they couldn't generate consistent pressure on the quarterback, and they were giving up quite a bit of points. So again, like, the narrative is going to be all about Lamar Jackson, all about his injuries and his play. It's a part of the story, but it is not the entirety of the story by any stretch of the imagination. Now, we'll see what happens with this team come the offseason in terms of, are they going to give Lamar Jackson a big extension? Does he even want one at this point? Does he want to play out the string in 2022? Potentially leverage the franchise tag once or twice? Like, will these two sides get a deal done? Only time will tell. But, look at this Ravens team. You could also point to John Harbaugh. You could say, I love the aggressiveness and going for the 2 for the win, but when that shit doesn't work out, you're going to get criticized. And you could point to that decision being wrong, or you could say the play call and the execution was terrible. But still, the result was the same. You lost. It was not solely on Lamar Jackson's shoulders as to why this team sucked when it mattered most in the last 6 games of that 2021 season. So now heading into this offseason, they've got some salary cap space, a little over $15 million, which is fascinating to me because you look at these Ravens teams and they're not exactly loaded with stars, but there always seems to be this thing where they don't have a ton of salary cap space. And they still have Lamar Jackson on his rookie quarterback deal. They got a ton of free agents, Calais Campbell, Brandon Williams, Tavon Young, Sammy Watkins, and it didn't matter, Patrick Richard, Jimmy Smith, Justin Houston, Anthony Averett, Bradley Bozeman. So you're not going to be able to keep all of them, which is a pretty steady common theme for the Baltimore Ravens, but you got to figure out who you're going to keep. But you look at this offseason, they've got to fix this offense. They've got to balance out this offense. The number one way they do that is addressing that damn offensive line, which was absolutely pathetic. Now, one of the things that will help is getting back Ronnie Stanley from injury, hopefully. That will help. That will shore up the left tackle spot. But this is also the price you pay when you trade away an Orlando Brown Jr. and you don't have him on the right side. Like, you need to get that right side of the line shored up. You also need some help on the interior. Marshall Leon ain't there anymore, so you need a left guard that could be a beast. You need guys, you need hosses on that front line to protect Lamar Jackson, do better in the run blocking, all of that. And then you've got to find a running back. Like, I know this team's invested some in running backs, but you got to keep investing until you get it fucking right. Lamar Jackson cannot be your team's leading rusher. And is just not a formula for long-term success. You've got to better balance out this offense, period. And that is the priority to me for the Ravens, is fixing that offense. And you'll say, well, what about the defense? That was the worst in the league against the pass. Yes, they need to address the pass rushing, get some edge rushers, address that secondary. They need to do that. But ultimately, the biggest priority is fixing that offense. The biggest priority is building around Lamar Jackson, protecting Lamar Jackson so you can hopefully get him through a 17-game regular season in 2022. Now, the good thing for the Ravens is the Browns are no better. The Steelers are especially without Big Ben. What do they do at quarterback, even though Big Ben was a liability more than he was a help in 2021? Like, the Ravens, with a couple of well-positioned moves, could be right back in the fold and potentially overtaking the Bengals in 2022. You know, because even though the Bengals made the Super Bowl, let's not pretend like they were outstanding all year. They lost to the Bears. They lost to the Jets. They had 10 wins on the year in the regular season, so they weren't exactly dominant here. But they got to fix that offense. The quickest path back to the playoffs for the Ravens, the quickest path to being a contender, is to improve that offensive line and that running game supporting Lamar Jackson.